Hello everybody and welcome to Omnipoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. I'm Jack and today I'm here with another Sun and Moon deck analysis for you guys. This time we're going to be looking at Tauros-GX paired with the sort of Yveltal engine we've been seeing do really well lately. I think Tauros is a really good partner for Yveltal. It offers a lot of different strategies for your opponent to have to play around, and it's another really solid attacker. We've also seen lists that are similar to this, or similar to this in theory, be played even in events like the World Championships. There was a UK, or a deck that a few UK players played that kind of sort of used a similar style or similar thought process to this, being able to Ninja Boy into a different attacker at certain points. So yeah, we're kind of thinking about that with and implementing that into a really strong Yveltal build. Obviously Yveltal-EX is the star of the show. We know how good this guy is, pretty much undisputed king of the format at the moment. Yeah, we've got two attacks, Evil Ball and Y-Cyclone, 170 HP EX by the way. Evil Ball doing for a dark and a colourless 20 plus 20 more for each energy attached to both active, and then Y-Cyclone for a dark and a DCE doing 90 and moving energy attached to Yveltal to one of your benched Pokemon. So obviously we can see that this guy has a lot of versatility in himself. Before we even look at the rest of the deck, we're able to blow stuff up with Evil Ball, do huge damage, take huge one-hit knockouts, but we can also preserve our energy. If we're going to get knocked out next turn, we can use Y-Cyclone, set up another attacker, and preserve some energy that way. So yeah, we all kind of know what Yveltal does, so I don't want to linger on this guy too much, but obviously a really strong card. Similarly with the Fright Knight Yveltal, the single Fright Knight we're playing, obviously a really strong ability. As long as Fright Knight is your active Pokemon, no tools in play have any effect, both yours and your opponent's. So first off, as always, if you're against a Mega matchup and you can manage to find this guy turn 1 super strong for them, or at least early in the game, means that they're going to struggle to, or they're going to have to deal with the getting around the Fright Knight to be able to Mega Evolve, which is pretty influential. It means that it's another sort of thing for them to have to think about. But also, with the rise in what seems to be one of the stronger decks coming out of the set, Lurantis Plume, this guy is a really nice, it's not a counter, but it strains some resources from the Lurantis Plume player. If we can Lysandre up their Floatstoned Vileplume, it doesn't matter that they've got a Floatstone on it if they found it turn 1, because Fright Knight shuts off the ability, and because of that, like we force them to find an Olympia, which is draining them of more resources, and that paired with Tauros-GX, which is a really nice attacker in that matchup. It means that we can actually win that matchup more consistently than you would think. I think it's actually slightly favoured towards this, just because Tauros is such a good counter to Lurantis that you have to really think about how they want to deal their damage. So yeah, between the single Yveltal and the two Tauros, which I'm going to go over in a second, we can actually win out the Lurantis Plume matchup fairly consistently. With Pitch Black Spear, we can also do a little bit of sniping, and it's fairly easy to set up because of the Max Elixirs and White Cyclone and such, but Fright Knight is one of the most important things about this card. Next up, we do have the two Tauros-GX. Just for anyone unaware, I'm pretty sure you all will be by now, but the GX mechanic is very similar to the EX mechanic. This guy gives up 2 prizes when he's knocked out. However, as you can see in some of the other videos in such as Lurantis Plume and Decidueye, these GXs can be stage 1s and stage 2s. So they're essentially like the stage 1 and stage 2 EXs, and they also have a special attack called a GX attack, which is usually a really strong attack. But you can only use one of these attacks per game. So our GX in this deck is Tauros-GX, 180 HP, normal type, weak to fighting, and 3 retreat cost. All 3 of his attacks, including his GX attack, are DCE compatible, so that's definitely worth noting. All you need to do is find a DCE, and this guy's live, which is really strong. So his first 2 attacks are pretty simple. We've got Rage, which is essentially Outrage, does 20 damage plus 10 more for each damage counter on Tauros. And then we've got Horn Attack for 60, so if you're not quite reaching more than 60 damage with Rage, you can use Horn Attack for a flat 60. Both of these attacks are just okay, they're nothing special, but they're usable at least. Then we've got his GX attack, Mad Bull GX, which is 30 damage times the number of counters on this Pokemon. So that can reach huge numbers. And it really means that our opponent has to think about how much damage they're doing to us. Because if they don't quite knock us out, and this is why it's good for the Lurantis matchup, if they don't knock us out, we can often respond KO them with a Mad Bull GX, meaning that we can go ahead in the prize race sometimes. They only technically take one prize if we're calling half of this guy's HP one prize. They're only taking one prize, whereas we're taking two. So yeah, it can work in our favour, and because we're running Ninja Boy, we can really pull this guy sort of out of anywhere. If our opponent just hits us for so much damage and we're able to then translate that into a Mad Bull GX for a knockout, it can often sort of disorient our opponent, especially because it's only a DCE cost. It's not like they're going to see us building up a 3 or 4 energy Pokemon that we're then going to Ninja Boy into, or building up a Tauros. We can just slap a DCE on to any Pokemon that takes a hit, find our Ninja Boy, and then Mad Bull GX for a knockout. We can also Rage for a knock. If like Rage will reach the knockout, it does a very similar effect. Unfortunately, you can play around 2 of his attacks at once, which is kind of a downside to Tauros. You can play around Rage and Mad Bull GX at the same time, but you essentially have to one-shot this guy to prevent him taking 2 prizes on you. Just because Mad Bull GX is essentially a guaranteed knockout if they aren't knocking Tauros GX out when they attack it. We have in the Lurantis matchup, they're either doing 40 or 120. If they're doing 40 and then 120 afterwards, they're not knocking us out anyway. So it doesn't matter that they've done the 40 to like pepper us up, because 40 plus 120 is 160 and we have 180 HP. And we also have things like Fighting Fury Belt as well. But not only that, if they go for the 120, it means that we can always respond with a Mad Bull GX and knock them out. And if they which means they often have to waste their GX attack, not Flower Supply. I don't remember what. I think it's Chloro Scythe or something like that. They have to waste their GX attack, knocking out our GX. At which point we can then save our GX attack for respond knocking them out later. So yeah, it's really, really nice. And even if they're, like we're saying, even if it means that they're forced of more resources, because they have to think about what they're dealing damage to, whether they're just hitting Yveltal for the sake of it, or whether they think we may have Ninja Boy in hand. It makes the Lurantis player really have to think about when and where they want to attack and how they're taking their 6 prizes. In other matchups, it's just nice to be able to Ninja Boy into a DCE attacker and be able to just hit a huge amount of damage to close out a game. We can also sort of pair it with a Yveltal with Y-Cyclone. We can Cyclone an energy off to preserve that for later. Ninja Boy and just need 1 energy, or we can leave the DCE on the Yveltal, meaning that we can just Mad Bull as soon as we find the Ninja Boy. So yeah, a really, really strong effect, and I think it's a really, really strong GX from the set. One that some people have, I think, sort of forgotten about, considering how strong some of the others are. I definitely don't think this is a GX to sort of forget about, and I think it's probably one of my favourite in this set, just because of how much raw power this Mad Bull GX can do if your opponent isn't careful about how much damage they're dealing. Of course, to complement the Yveltal line, we are indeed running a 2-2 Garb. Yveltal Garb is undeniably one of the best decks in format at the moment. In some people's eyes, it is the best deck in format. So we're just complementing that by playing the Garb. It doesn't take anything away from Tauros-GX, has no abilities, so we're not hindering ourselves there. And again, similarly with pairing it with Fright Knight in the Lurantis matchup, if we manage to get Garbodor online, then whilst we don't have the Lysandre stall play on the Vileplume, if Garbodor's online, it means that they don't have their item lock up, so we're probably favoured in that matchup anyway, because we're not item locked anymore. So between Yveltal and Tauros and Garbodor, we have a lot of different ways to navigate the Lurantis Plume matchup, which I think is a matchup that you have to make sure you can navigate going into this format, at least for the first couple of weeks, because I think it's going to be quite a popular archetype. And then finally, we have indeed got 2 Shaymin-EX. As per most Yveltal lists, they most run 2, just to keep cycling through the deck. Nothing too special to say about them. Onto the supporters, we are running for Sycamore, strongest supporter in format. I don't think that's changing anytime soon. And then 3N, I like having 3N over 2 nowadays. Maybe 6 weeks ago, maybe 4 weeks ago, we would have said 2 is a more standard number. But I like just having a 7th supporter to start with. It means that we're not constantly worrying about opening like lone Trubbish or whatever, and not having anything to do with a 7th supporter. It's just another card, another actual physical copy of a card that we can open up with and be able to do things on our opening turn. Also with, I guess it's worth mentioning, also with Yveltal, a lot of their damage stays on board, or a lot of their win conditions stay on board. So even though Tauros-GX is sort of a Ninja Boy combo, a lot of the time you're going to be doing this mid-game rather than... You can take the last 2 prizes with it, but you definitely have the option to do this mid-game as well, which means you can still go down the natural Yveltal win route of setting up a huge Yveltal and then ending your opponent to a low hand size and just taking 2 knockouts turn after turn. So having N in the late, having more copies of N means we have it more in the late game as well, which can lock our opponent out of win conditions too. 2 Lysandre to be able to pick off anything that we want to. Obviously with Yveltal we can pretty much do any amount of damage. Same with Tauros. It just means that we can pick and choose where our prizes come from. 1 Ninja Boy, as we've mentioned. We don't want 2 just because we don't want them to clog up the hand. A lot of the time this card won't be as, like, it won't always be active. It'll only be active in certain situations, but in the situations it is active in, when we've got a Tauros left in the deck, maybe we've got 1 set up on the bench, but if we've got a Tauros left in the deck, the times that we've taken a hit, Ninja Boy will become active. So we want to be able to at least utilise this guy. And with 4 VS Seeker, we don't mind if we have to dump it early on, because we have access to it later on. I don't think you want to, just because, like I say, it kind of clogs up the hand. It's not an insta-play card. It's not a useful card on a lot of turns. It's only useful in specific situations. But the situations it is useful in are really, really strong. So definitely a really important card, and it kind of makes the Tauros line of this deck work. We're running 1 Team Flare Grunt. Yeah, just being able to sort of outlast your opponent. It helps with the mirror, meaning that they can't respond 1 hit, knock you out sometimes, and just slowing things down. I think if you can practice well with this card and know when to use it, it really, really benefits sort of strong play, because it means that your opponent sometimes will miss an energy drop, and it will force them to have to just take sort of a mediocre swing at you. Maybe they have to have a Y Cyclone instead to try and preserve energy, and that's when things like Tauros-GX are going to be, or the Tauros Ninja Boy combo is going to be most viable, because if our opponent isn't able to knock us out, they're more likely to try and preserve resources with things like Y Cyclone or another lower power attack that it's not worth them doing a big attack. And at that point, anything above sort of 70 damage, we're often going to be one-shotting in return with Mad Bull GX. So it kind of complements the Ninja Boy. If you can time this right, you can sort of set up a 2-turn combo which leads to a strong knockout going into your opponent's turn. So yeah, and then just in general, it's nice to be able to disrupt your opponent. And we've seen quite a few people at least trying this card out. It's undecided whether it's sort of a staple in Yveltal, but I think it's definitely a pretty strong card in here. We've got 1 Olympia simply because we also don't want to be sort of Lysandre stalled. We want a way of being able to search out a form of switching with the VS Seekers. We are running Floatstones, so it's not the end of the world if something gets Lysandre active. But against other Fright Knights, we can also get Lysandre stalled if something's got a float, and just in general, having a reusable switch that isn't a tool attachment, it means that we don't have to expend that resource. So yeah, having the Olympia is nice. And finally, in a similar vein to Team Flare Grunt, we've got another disruption card, Delinquent, another really, really strong one of just stopping our opponent from lowering themselves to a low hand size to be able to Shaymin next turn or Sycamore next turn. It really punishes sort of players that kind of go all in, especially if you can respond with a knockout from Yveltal or Tauros as well. It means that they often don't have much on board and don't have a hand size, so they go into top deck mode pretty much immediately, which sometimes they will top deck out of, but sometimes it's really difficult to if they've spent a lot of resources up to this point in the game. So yeah, it's just a really, really nice supporter. Items wise, we are of course running 4 VS Seeker. We're running 4 one-off supporters, so being able to reuse them as and when we want is really useful. 4 Ultra Ball, again, discards cards for Shaymin and searches anything in the deck, so another really strong card. And again, 4 Max Elixir, pretty standard in Yveltal lists, just setting up our attackers quickly, meaning that we can apply pressure early on in the game and start taking knockouts early on. Again, nothing too much to say. Similarly with the 2 Trainers Mail, cycling through the deck is really important to be able to find our Ninja Boy as and when we need it. So having these cycle cards, or these cards that act as sort of draw into other cards to cycle, is really nice. We don't have the space for 3 because of the Ninja Boy combo, 3 or 4, but we've seen lists do well with 0, so it's not like this card is a must-have in the deck, it's just a nice option to have in the deck. And when we're looking for a combo like this Ninja Boy combo, it can be useful to have a couple of cards that do not search the deck, but look through a few more cards in the deck to try and find the Ninja Boy or the VS Seeker that we're looking for. We've got 3 Fury Belt. Fury Belting either the Tauros or the Yveltal just makes them even tankier, makes them more of a threat. And yeah, obviously anything that can take an extra hit means that we're going to be winning the prize trade again, which is what this deck is all about, really. 3 Floatstone. Make sure Garbodor is online pretty frequently. It means that we can't get Lysandre stalled or start with an awkward Pokemon in the active position. We can always sort of hit with what we want to hit. And I think that's really important. This deck is all about applying pressure and making our opponent sort of have to work to try and keep up with us. So we don't want to be in a situation where we can apply pressure but we're stuck with something in the active. So having that sort of 3 count means that we can still get Garbodor online quite consistently, but we don't mind expending some cards to be able to force our opponent to try and keep up with us by attaching a Floatstone to retreat. Then finally, stadium-wise, we're running 2 Parallel City. Another good thing about Delinquent, it means that if our opponent Parallel Cities us before we can Parallel City them, we can get rid of their Parallel City with Delinquent, and then Parallel City ourselves, forcing their own Delinquent or an alternative stadium that they may play, which is really strong. Obviously, Parallel deals, I think the choose effect is really strong at the moment. We've got a lot of good fire, water and grass decks in the format, meaning that the -20 damage from those is really strong. And then anything that isn't fire, water, grass, lowering their bench size to 3 can be really difficult for them to deal with. Along with that, if they are fire, water, grass, you can also like get rid of anything that you don't want on the bench. If your Shaymins are going to be a liability, which they often are, you are able to Parallel City your own side down to 3 and get rid of any useless cards like Shaymin or the extra Trubbish maybe, just to be able to prevent anything or your opponent having any other win conditions. It means that they have to deal with these Yveltals or these Tauruses that you've set up, and they don't have the ease of being able to take prizes on Shaymins. So yeah, I think Parallel, it definitely is kind of at an all-time high at the moment. I was thinking the other day, it looks like it's lost play, but I think actually it's probably still one of the strongest stadiums we've got in format, if not the strongest. Finally, rounding off the energy, a pretty simple count of 4 DCE and 9 Dark. The DCE is obviously usable by any of our 3 main attackers here, and then 9 Dark means that just Max Elixirs often, or hit them often enough to not worry about missing them on crucial turns, especially in the early turns. Towards later on in the game, you can know how much you've gone through and you know whether a Max Elixir is going to hit an energy, but in the early turns, having 9 energy in the deck means that we're going to be hitting Max Elixir quite consistently. So yeah, it's a pretty simple build. It's very similar to Yveltal as of late that's been doing really well, but we wanted to we wanted that to be the case. We wanted to capture what Yveltal does good and then weave in Tauros to be able to deal with some of these new matchups coming into Sun and Moon. So yeah, if you have any questions about the deck, feel free to leave them down in the comments. Thank you very much for watching. I've been Jack from Omnipoke, and I look forward to seeing you all in another video.